No, that's fine. That's fine.
Apology.
So guys, this is Dr. Dipraj Mukherjee and I teach at Kent State University. This is in Ohio. So it's basically good afternoon from me. I know we are having all our colleagues from different parts of the world. So it's good day to all of you. As you can see, that's my paper, Belt and Road Initiative, Geostrategy or Geoeconomics. Incidentally, we started, talking about Belt and Road Initiative with actually Professor Bellamy just at the start of the conference as well. So it's nice that we are ending that with the Belt and Road Initiative too. So what I'll do is I'll first talk about the initiative to begin with. The initiative is basically launched by China. This is the brainchild of President Xi. And he talked about the land-based belt and the road, which is basically the maritime routes. I will show you the graph and you will see the maritime routes. What I can tell you that there are 65 countries initially, and now it's expanding. I'm talking about pre-COVID-19. Now it was expanding. Post-COVID-19, what will happen? That's a very good question. I'll try to touch upon that a little bit, but that's a question that's still wide open to all of us. But the first 65 countries, if I take them, then I can see that 40% of global GDP is coming from them. 65% of the world's population is coming from them. And there was an estimate that China would invest $1.3 trillion by 2027 in the Belt and Road Initiative. However, you have to take that with a grain of salt right now. Because of COVID-19, I'm sure the global conventional order will change, to some extent. So that's really the background, guys. Now, if I look into the routes, this is the route, guys, or I should say these are. I have a land belt which connects China through Central Asia and then goes to Eurasia and stops at Europe. I also have a maritime route which actually connects China through the South China Sea and then Indian Ocean and goes to Africa and then goes to Europe. If you really pause and think about this particular map here a little bit, you will find two interesting things. China is basically an oil and gas strapped economy. They don't have oil and gas. So if that's the case, now let's think about this here. I don't know how many of you are kind of aware of this geographic location. Around here, you have right around Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, you have the Strait of Malacca. Now, the Strait of Malacca is a place through which oil imports do happen, oil exports and imports do happen. That's a very important shipping place. And that's a choke point as well for China. So if there is any kind of strategical move by the big players in that particular region against China at any point in time, you will find that they can actually choke that area, which will then stop the oil movement or the oil import that's going to China. So that's why it's very important for China to really have more and more openings to get oil as well. I'm particularly talking about China because that's China's brainchild. Now, if you think about it, all the Central Asia and connecting Europe and Africa, that's where the oil part of it would come in, especially the Central Asia part of it here, guys. I will talk about two flagship initiatives by this Belt and Road, and you will see why I'm saying so. So that's the map, guys, which connects almost the entirety of the world, really, or the Eurasia. The first two, projects I'd like you to pay attention to, which is Gwadar Port Development. Gwadar is a port which is a deep sea port in Pakistan, which opens in Arabian Sea. Now, if that's the case, guys, I was mentioning to you the oil and gas scenario. So if that's the case, if Gwadar is connected to China, then they can actually import and export, commodities, particularly import oil. So the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which is CPEC, which is basically their main plank in terms of their land-based routes, that's very important from that perspective. Also, the second one, which is Trans-Siberian Railway expansion, now that connects Central Asia, China, and finally stops almost going to Europe. And that's again important because that's the ancient Silk Route. If you think about the ancient Silk Route, that's where the ancient Silk Route would be to begin with. There was a maritime presence at that point in time in the ancient time, even in the medieval age as well. But that maritime presence was limited. Land-based routes were more important in terms of the trade that happened at that point in time. So CPEC, which is the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, as I just told you, it starts at China, basically the Xinjiang province, which has the issues. I don't know if you are aware of it, but there are certain issues with the Xinjiang province. And then it connects from Xinjiang through Pakistan. There is some disputed border there between Pakistan and India. I'm sure you were aware of it, which is Kashmir. And through that, it goes and enters Pakistan and then goes to the Arabian Sea. But going to the Arabian Sea is important because now that gives them a mouth, an opening somewhere through which they can actually import oil. And CPEC is their main flagship initiative. China has already planned to invest, and they have already started investing as well in Pakistan, infrastructural development for CPEC and so on. And primarily the investment is around $60 billion. Now, Pakistan, which is definitely in a need for cash, that's something which is mutually beneficial as well if that's successful. There are certain doubts that's there, but I don't think that the CPEC is primarily my objective to talk about over here. So if anyone has a question about CPEC, I would definitely welcome you to talk to me later on, like email me, and I would like to get some voice from the regional players, from someone who knows that region, who right now is doing research about that region, because I am working with CIBER. CIBER is Center for International Business and Economic Research. That's a US government-based organization. And I'd like to see the impact on Pakistan and other Central Asian economies. So you're welcome to talk to me after the presentation, or maybe email me later on. What's the strategic driver behind this move? I will go back to Spikeman. Spikeman wrote this map, or developed this map, I should say, in 1944, guys. And in 1950, because of the Marshall Plan by the US, this map got more and more attention. The idea is basically who controls this Eurasia. If you can control this Eurasia, you will control the destiny of the world. Now, that might be a little exaggeration to begin with, but that was the idea in 1940s. And from that idea, again, if you think about the Belt and Road Initiative, it's the same thing. I'm almost replicating that over here if I look into the Spikeman geopolitical map. So this is the one, guys. What's the logic for China to go into these countries? If you think about now, I'd like you to particularly think about the Central Asian countries like Uzbekistan, the 5 countries, Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan and so on. If you think about these 5 countries which were developed at 1990s, right after the Soviet downfall, and these countries, they do need cash. They do need cash for infrastructure. Now, if that's the idea, let's come back to China. China says capital logic, they will provide foreign direct investment there. And there is a territorial logic as well. What is the territorial logic? That's the market. These Central Asian countries are the market through which you will go to Middle East, and then you will go to Europe. So that's why, from China's perspective, it was so very important to connect the land-based routes. Again, the maritime routes is very important for the Belt and Road Initiative, guys. But for me, I particularly focus on the kind of land-based routes here. Now, why I'm saying that Belt and Road Initiative is so important for these Central Asian countries, I'll give you my reason over here. If I look into the regional development that it might create, okay, let's see. Who are the top 15 trading partners for China? And guys, again, this is pre-COVID-19, okay? If I think about the pre-COVID-19 and the Hong Kong crisis just began at that point in time. So you have to take that into account as well. This is 2019, second quarter I'm talking about. If I think about the top 15 trading partners, guys, you can see that there is no Central Asian countries, neither Pakistan is there. So all these countries would benefit immensely, that there is no doubt about, with the infrastructural development that it might create, the Belt and Road Initiative. Why am I saying that there can be a Belt and Road Initiative and some kind of an infrastructural development? My idea, pinpoint, actually goes back to one of the ideas from international trade theory. By the way, guys, I'm an international political economist. So international trade theory is something which is my bread and butter. I'll just talk about that a little bit. I'm not going to the theory whatsoever. I'll show you an equation. I'll move on, I promise. The theory is known as the theory of gravity model. So what's the theory of gravity model? The theory of gravity model is this one, guys, that trade between two countries depend on the product term of their GDPs and then divided by the distance between two countries. So the product term of the GDPs. So think about, say something like a Central Asian country, which is Turkmenistan. Turkmenistan and China. China has huge GDP, second largest GDP, $14 trillion. So the product of GDP is way higher and the distance is less. Because of that, there will be more trade with all these Central Asian countries. If there are more trade with the Central Asian countries, then of course there is economic development that will come along with it. So that's the idea, the Belt and Road Initiative in terms of the land routes. If it's successful, it can definitely promote infrastructural development and then following the economic development. Now, this is a very, very simplified gravity model. I just wanted you to see the gravity model over here, that GDP for your partner country, which is China in this case, and the distance between the countries is very important to understand the trade between these two countries. So there is no doubt about that the infrastructural development and the economic development shall happen for all these Central Asian countries. Did it happen? Well, if I think about the 2013 was the time when it was launched, the Belt and Road Initiative. And if I think about 2015, you can see that China becoming more and more of the second largest economy in, from say 20th century, early 20th century up to say 2015. By then, they are already the second largest economy. The trade between China and the Central Asian countries, they picked up immensely. As you can see, the trade between China and the Central Asian countries were 0.9 in terms of what it was in terms of the percentages. It became 24.7 by 2015. So definitely, Belt and Road Initiative can get the leverage from this trade, and all the countries, the member countries, can benefit out of it. That there is no doubt about. If it's successful, if it's promoted in the way that it should be. What are the concerns then? The first concern is Southeast Asia. The second is I'll talk about the cultural issues. And the third, I'll talk about the COVID-19 pandemic. The first one is Southeast Asia and Africa and Southeast Asia. So why am I saying that there is a concern? I will go to a picture, as you know, that a picture can speak 1,000 words. So instead of talking about it from this slide, I will go here. I'll show you this picture, guys. China lends billions to Africa each year. If you think about, see, 2016, it was $30 billion in terms of loans that was lent out to African countries. However, now let's go into specifics. Think about Djibouti. Djibouti is a country which is at a very, very strategic position in Africa. Djibouti opens up at Red Sea that connects then, to the Suez Canal as well. Now, Djibouti, China holds 77% of debt. So 77% of GDP is the debt to China to begin with, the debt to China in terms of the debt share to GDP. Now, why is that important? That's important because I will go to the next slide and you will see that's known as the debt diplomacy. If you hold, or if you are the one, if you are the lender country and you hold so staggering amount of debt of all these African countries, Congo, Zambia, Ethiopia, Somalia, then of course you have a say. I will come back to Djibouti once again, guys. Djibouti is important because US has a strategic strategic military base there. And China has created a military base there as well. It's a geostrategic move. Of course, it's a geo-economic move that there's no doubt about, but it's a geostrategic move as well. Because now you have a scenario which is where in the same country, Djibouti has a strong US presence in terms of its navy, and China has some presence as well in terms of its military there too right now. They have a supply base that they're saying is there in Djibouti. If I think about Southeast Asia, I'll talk about a country which is Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka has a seaport, Hambantota, guys. Hambantota was developed by China, but the idea of creating Hambantota is something like this, that they will get a lease for 99 years. Chinese government or the Chinese companies will get a lease for 99 years. And that was the deal with China, between China and Sri Lanka. So is it that they are lending out the money, or they are lending out the money because of a debt trap diplomacy? That's a question. That's a criticism. I am not saying that it's always a fair criticism, but that's a criticism that can come from the liberal West kind of ideas, the Western influence. So that's the criticism, and debt trap diplomacy is a big concern for all these developing countries. If that's the case, guys, let's come back to two other Asian powers. The two other Asian powers, other than China, of course, which is the second largest economy, I would say would be Japan and India. So I will talk about Japan and India. But before going to Japan and India, I will tell you why the criticism may have some juice in it, I will say that there is a fear of ethnocentricity. Why am I saying there is a fear of ethnocentricity? That because China is, or it always considered it to be the middle kingdom, the center point, the focal point of the world. If that's the case, and if that's the central point or the focal point, sometimes the question can be that, are you doing the Belt and Road Initiative to help all the member countries where all of us do have equal kind of footing? Or are you doing it simply because you want to have a market where you want to sell your goods and you want to have the routes through which you can import your oil and gas? That's a question that can come in. And that question can have some validity if I look into this particular dream that President Xi had. The dream was like this: national humiliation China did from 19th century, middle 19th century to middle of 20th century. Then rebuilding is what he focused on, or he thinks that China focused on from 1949 to 2012. Then moderate prosperity, which is up to 2020. And then national rejuvenation by 2049. And by 2050, that is after this 100 or this kind of 200 years, China is kind of projecting to be proud and strong and to become the largest economy, which it very well might. So that kind of gives the fear of ethnocentricity. That is it because you are doing a one-way trade, or do you think that there is a two-way trade opportunity that exists between the two? That fear gets even more kind of gas if I think about Japan and India. Both Japan and India are very reluctant partners, if I can actually call them partners of the Belt and Road Initiative, which I will hesitate to call. And Quad is a four-way formation of Japan, India, Australia, and the US, who are trying to create an economic, trade, and also a political, geopolitical, strategic base or a strategic coordination amongst the four countries. Japan and India, they do not think for any moment that this is something that's not encroaching upon their sovereignty, and they have issues to begin with. So that's why I picked Japan and India, but that doesn't mean that the Southeast Asia, they do not have the questions. Now, finally, guys, and I'll pause here, I'll say, with COVID-19, I was collecting some data of COVID-19 and how it might impact the Belt and Road Initiative. To understand that, I got from the newspaper articles to begin with, I got quite a few quotes that I can mention to you, not really verbatim, but something like a paraphrase. Like the Bangladesh Transport Minister is saying, we have to rethink about the Chinese influence in our country. Malaysian Prime Minister suggested something along that line. Many African countries are casting their doubts right now of the debt trap diplomacy and if that's working. Given all this, and again, the perception of COVID-19, again, guys, this can be a very contentious point. So I will avoid to say so, and I'll come to the more mainstream part of it, which is there is a perception that the COVID-19 emerged from China. If that's the perception, that perception creates a problem as well. So all this creates a negative outlook for China if I consider China as a brand. Okay, and given that, I was looking into the data and I found something like this. The mergers and acquisitions, that is outward foreign direct investment from China, in 2019, it was 176 companies that Chinese companies merged or purchased, acquired in the overseas. However, in 2020, it dried up by 70%. So a 70% dry up simply means, which was 176 companies, mergers and acquisitions in 2019, roughly it would be around 40. And that's a complete, like a ballpark figure I'm giving you guys. I'm just calculating right now. So the investment will dry up. These countries, African countries I have shown you, Southeast Asian countries I've shown you, they were getting quite a few, they were getting huge investments from China. But because of the pandemic, and because that will cause a distress, and that's already causing a distress in the Chinese economy, there is a chance that this outward foreign direct investment will dry up. If that's the case, then you will find more and more schisms opening out as well, because now the African countries have to pay their debts, and the Southeast Asian countries have to pay their debts, and so on and so forth. So how will that look post-COVID-19 is a good question, and unfortunately I do not have an answer, but something that I look forward to look into. So I can say at the very end that COVID-19 definitely tarnished the image of Belt and Road Initiative. Now it might be good for them because it's influencing globally and it's giving China more space as well, global, say in a more global order. That might be the case as well. We will have to see and find out. I know that Professor Mayas will say that my time will be up pretty soon. So I'll pause here and I'll thank you, and I'll thank you all for giving me the opportunity to talk about this excellent kind of plan that's there. If it's successful, it will be a Marshall Plan of the 21st century. But I think I have mentioned multiple times, you could see that there are certain doubts that one can say. So I'll stop here, guys. Thank you.